The chicken you had for dinner last night was 6 weeks old when it died. It had the body of an adult, but the bones of an infant. There's a good chance it couldn't walk for the last days of its life. Its heart was under so much strain, pumping blood to muscles that grew faster than its organs could handle. That millions of birds, just like it, never even made it to the slaughterhouse. They collapsed inside the shed. And every single one of those birds, every rotisserie chicken at the grocery store, every nugget in a fast food bag, every free-range organic breast at the farmer's market, can trace its genetics back to a beauty pageant held in Delaware in 1948. This is the story of how the world's most eaten meat was engineered from scratch, how two corporations you've never heard of control the DNA of nearly every chicken on the planet, and why the animal that feeds more humans than any other can barely survive its own body. Let's start at the beginning. Before World War II, chicken was not a casual weeknight dinner. It was expensive. It was special. Families served it on Sundays, holidays, or when important guests came over. Herbert Hoover's famous 1928 campaign promise, a chicken in every pot, worked precisely because most Americans couldn't afford to eat chicken regularly. It was a luxury item, like lobster used to be. Back then, most chickens came from small family farms. Farmers raised dual-purpose birds, breeds that laid a decent number of eggs and produced a reasonable amount of meat, but weren't spectacular at either. These birds grew slowly, lived outdoors, ate scraps and insects, and took about 16 weeks to reach a modest market weight. A typical chicken in 1925 weighed maybe 2.5 pounds at slaughter. Nobody was getting rich selling chickens. Then came World War II. Beef and pork were rationed and shipped overseas to feed the troops, but chicken wasn't rationed. Domestic consumption jumped. And when the war ended, the poultry industry had a problem. They'd ramped up production to meet wartime demand, and now they needed to keep that demand going. So, in 1945, America's largest grocery chain, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, better known as A&P, partnered with the USDA to launch something extraordinary. They called it the Chicken of Tomorrow contest. The premise was straightforward. Poultry breeders from across the country would compete to create a better bird, one that grew bigger, faster, and on less feed than anything that existed. State competitions ran in 1946 and 1947, with regional winners advancing to a national final held at the University of Delaware in 1948. The contest even had its own parade, complete with a Chicken of Tomorrow queen riding in a carriage through Georgetown, Delaware. 3 miles long. For a chicken breeding competition. The winners changed the world. Charles and Kenneth Vantris entered a hybrid cross. Red Cornish males bred with New Hampshire red females that outperformed everything else for feed efficiency and growth. Henry Saglio from Arbor Acres Farm won the purebred category with his white Plymouth Rocks. Eventually, the Vantris birds and the Arbor Acres birds were crossbred, and that combination became the genetic foundation for virtually every commercial chicken produced on Earth from that point forward. And here's where it gets concentrated in a way most people don't realize. Those two winning lineages didn't stay with small farmers. They were bought, merged, and consolidated through decades of corporate acquisitions. Today, the genetics of nearly every broiler chicken on the planet, whether it's in a supermarket in Kansas, a KFC in Shanghai, or a farmer's market in France, traces back to just two companies. Aviagen, owned by a German conglomerate called the EW Group, and Cobb Vantris, owned by Tyson Foods. Between them, they control somewhere between 70 and 90% of the global broiler genetics market. Two companies, billions of birds. Think about that for a second. These companies don't sell the chickens you eat. They sell the breeding stock, the great-grandparents of the chickens that end up on your plate. The genetics are proprietary, protected by a 4-way crossbreeding system designed so that no farmer could ever reproduce the birds on their own. The chickens are essentially intellectual property, living, breathing trade secrets. Now, what have those genetics produced? In 1957, A broiler chicken reached about 900 grams in 56 days. By 1978, that same time frame produced a bird weighing 1.8 kilograms. By 2005, it was 4.2 kilograms. That's a 400% increase in growth rate in less than 50 years. And nearly 90% of that increase came from genetic selection alone, not from better feed, not from hormones, which have actually been banned in US poultry since the 1950s, but from relentlessly breeding the fastest-growing birds with other fast-growing birds, generation after generation after generation. The modern broiler chicken reaches slaughter weight in about 42 days, 6 weeks. That's a baby in chicken terms, the equivalent of a toddler. A chicken from the 1950s took 12 weeks to reach a much smaller size. Today's birds grow so rapidly that if a human baby grew at the same rate, a 2-month-old would weigh over 300 pounds. This speed comes at a staggering cost to the animal. The skeleton can't keep pace with the muscle. Bones that should still be hardening are forced to support a body that's ballooning in size every single day. Studies have found that over 27% of commercial broilers have poor locomotion by the time they're 40 days old. More than 3% can barely walk at all. In Sweden, over 72% of surveyed chickens showed some walking abnormality. Research using pain relief drugs confirmed what anyone watching these birds could guess. The lameness is painful. When given anti-inflammatory medication, lame chickens moved significantly faster, proving they'd been hobbled by chronic pain. The heart is another casualty. A broiler's cardiac system was never designed to support this much body mass growing this quickly. Hearts enlarge, trying to pump blood to ballooning muscles. Fluid builds up around the lungs and abdomen, a condition called ascites. In the UK alone, up to 19 million broilers die inside their sheds from heart failure every year. Not at the slaughterhouse, in the shed, before they ever reach the processing line. And then there's the breast. The entire point of modern breeding has been to maximize breast meat, because that's what consumers buy. As a result, the broiler's center of gravity has shifted forward compared to its ancestors. These birds are front-heavy, barrel-chested, walking on legs that were never built for the load. Imagine strapping a heavy backpack to your chest and trying to walk across a room. Now imagine doing that on legs made of cartilage that hasn't finished forming. That's roughly what life is like for a 6-week-old broiler. Most commercial broilers spend their entire lives, all 6 weeks of it, inside enclosed sheds with tens of thousands of other birds. Typical stocking densities give each chicken about the area of an A4 sheet of paper. They stand and sit on litter that accumulates ammonia from their droppings throughout the growing cycle. The ammonia burns their feet and legs, causing lesions called hock burns that are so common they're considered an industry standard, not a welfare violation. The parent birds, the breeding stock, face their own nightmare. Because broilers are genetically programmed to eat and grow non-stop, the parent birds have to be kept on severe feed restriction to prevent them from becoming too obese to reproduce. These birds are chronically hungry. They're bred to want to eat constantly and then denied the food their bodies are screaming for. It's a paradox baked into the genetics. The trait that makes the offspring profitable makes the parents miserable. So, where does all of this leave us? Chicken went from Sunday dinner to the world's most consumed meat in a single lifetime. American consumption surpassed pork in 1985 and beef in 1992. Today, the US poultry industry produces over 43 billion pounds of meat annually, generating more than $20 billion in revenue. KFC alone operates over 25,000 stores in 125 countries. Tyson Foods, the same company that owns Cobb Vantress and its genetic blueprints, slaughters roughly 35 million chickens per week. And the farmers who actually raise these birds, most of them don't own the chickens. Under the contract farming model that now dominates the industry, companies like Tyson supply the chicks, the feed, and the veterinary protocols. The farmer supplies the land, the labor, and the debt from building the chicken houses. The company sets the price. If the farmer disagrees, the company finds another farmer. It's a system where the people closest to the animals have the least power over how they're raised. It costs less per pound than almost any other protein. And behind that cheapness is a system that redesigned a living animal into a production unit so efficient that it can barely survive its own growth rate. The Chicken of Tomorrow contest in 1948 was celebrated as a triumph of American ingenuity. The winning breeds were healthy, robust birds, but 75 years of relentless selection pressure turned those champions into something their creators wouldn't recognize. An animal that reaches market weight before its bones have finished forming, that can suffer heart failure before it's old enough to crow, and whose entire genetic blueprint is owned by 2 corporations most people have never heard of. Next time you pick up a pack of chicken breasts at the store, remember that every single one of those birds can trace its ancestry back to a contest held at a Delaware university in 1948, where a parade queen rode through town celebrating the future of poultry. Nobody at that parade imagined what the chicken of tomorrow would actually become. If you found this eye-opening, subscribe for more videos like this. See you in the next one.